All right. So today I'm gonna be talking about CICD specifically in TeamCity with TeamCity and Octopus Deploy. So I'll start by giving a definition of CICD. So what is CICD? It's a continuous integration and continuous delivery or continuous deployment. It's the automated process in which the development team code is merged in order for it to be built, tested, packaged, and delivered. And having a well-established CI/CD pipeline helps improve the team collaboration and code quality. Uh, I think the majority in Simpat work with Azure DevOps, but with our client texture, we use TeamCity and Octopus. So TeamCity is the continuous integration tool, and Octopus Deploy is the continuous deployment tool we use. So what is TeamCity? It's a build, management, and continuous integration server. It is available as a cloud service or an on-premise installation. And what is it used for? It's used to build and test applications in an automated manner. It provides rapid feedback on code change, reduces code integration problems, and leads to a more effective teamwork. And what's Octopus Deploy? It's a continuous deployment tool used to manage releases and automate deployments. And how does it fit in your CI/CD pipeline? Well, you have your source control system, GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab, etc. And you have your build server to compile the code and run tests. TeamCity, which is the one I'm gonna be talking about, Jenkins, and there's many others. So far, are there any questions? If no, I'll begin with the TeamCity configuration. So these are the different items you need to start the automated integration. So first, we're gonna be looking at root projects and subprojects, project build configuration, version control settings, triggers, parameters, and build steps. So I'm gonna go through the slides and then I'll open TeamCity and describe it a little bit more. So setting up your root project and subprojects. Initially, when you install TeamCity, there's a root project created by default. And the root project holds any shared configuration between all the subprojects. So it's like the parent project, right? Uh, these are some uh, these are some of the common items that are reused in the subproject. So your SSH keys for GitHub, for example, different environment variables, parameters that are used, and your retention policy cleanup rules. And within the root project, there are different subprojects with will that hold different build configurations for your actual project. So you can have a build configuration that will build the main branch and trigger a deployment. And you can also have build configurations specifically for feature branches for developers that will run the tests. That way, developers don't have to run them manually every time. And there's going to be a continuous check. So in the build configuration, you will have steps that are the steps that are needed for the automated process, as well as your version control setting, triggers, and parameters. What's version control settings? It's basically the repository, right? So it's where the code will be fetched from. GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab, etc. So what do you need to configure it? Well, you have to set up the type. You need the fetch URL, specify the branch, you want for that configuration, and the authentication method. In our case, we have SSH keys that are from GitHub. And what are triggers and parameters? So triggers, it's basically what you specify that's gonna trigger the automated build, right? So for example, if we want the build to be triggered when there is a commit into that branch, right? Or you can have dependencies that when another build finishes, you want that build configuration to be triggered. And the parameters within the sub project are only available for that sub project. So you can either override the root project parameters or add extra.
Can you add more than one trigger, or is one?
Yeah, you can have more than one trigger.
Okay.
All right. So the build steps are the most important part of your build configuration, right? These are the steps in sequential order are gonna be executed. And TeamCity already provides some different plugins and tools that you can use. So like the .NET CLI, the Docker CLI, etc. But if there is a plugin that it's not provided by TeamCity, the good thing is that there are community plugins that you can use. And one of those is the Octopus Deploy plugin, which is provided by Octopus Deploy, which helps the integration between TeamCity and Octopus. And there's many more. So now I'm gonna show you a little bit more into depth how a sub-project build configuration looks like. Do you guys see my browser or are you still seeing the presentation?
Browser.
See your browser.
All right. So here we have like I mentioned, the root project with the different sub-projects. As you can see, we have a lot. And I'm gonna go into this one. So within this sub-project, we have the version control settings, where you can specify the URL for the repository, the branch, the authentication method, etc. We have the different parameters that are used, and so on. Then if we go within the build configuration, I'm gonna go into this one. You can override that sub-project version control setting or reuse the one from the sub-project. You have your different triggers. So to answer your question, Daniel, we'll have this one that's triggered when a commit is pushed to that branch. And you can have different trigger rules. So for example, I only wanted this to be triggered when there are changes within this folder. I don't care about anything else, right? So if it detects changes within this folder, it's gonna trigger the build. And I can add more, right? But I don't wanna modify that.
Uh, a question right here. Is there a way to, I mean, I don't know if there exists a trigger based on a successful deploy on Octopus or something like that?
No, that will be probably from Octopus. You'll have to use a TeamCity API to do that, right?
Okay. Well,
Or, but hold on, in the step for the release, you can specify that it will fail or succeed. So for example, if in here, right? If this build, when this build finishes, if it succeeds on the deployment, in here we have a dependency for these other microservices. See, we have a dependency on this build. So when that build succeeds, the trigger is that it's gonna trigger this build. Maybe that's how
Okay.
you can connect. All right, I'm gonna go back to this one.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. And here you have the different build steps as well. So we have our restore NuGet packages step, which uses the plugin, the .NET CLI tool. Build, publish. Then we have the Octopus plugin that's gonna pack that publish build into a NuGet package file. This next step is gonna push that NuGet package into the Octopus feed with the API and your API key, etc. And the last step will use the Octopus API to create a release. So here you specify which project, which I'm gonna show in a little bit, the release number, and which environment to create the deployment. All right. Any other questions so far? All right, I'll move on. So like I said, that last step is gonna use the Octopus API to trigger the release. And now, since we have to configure Octopus for that deployment, I'm gonna go over the different items that are needed to deploy your application to Azure. So you need an Azure subscription account. You'll need to set up the environments, the deployment targets, the Lifecycles retention policy, create the project, and add the different steps, processes to the project, and variable replacement per environment. So we'll start by with the deployment targets. So what are deployment targets? They are machines or services where the application will be deployed. So this can be Windows or Linux servers, Azure, AWS, or Kubernetes. And what do we need in order to configure one? So first you need access to that service or server, right? In our case, it's Azure. So we need to add an Azure subscription account. So under infrastructure, you can add the account. After you do that, you'll need to know how many environments you're gonna need, right? So you can have dev, test, staging, production, etc. For our case, I'm gonna show just the dev one, but you can have as many as you want. It's up to you. Then after you create the environments, you're gonna create the deployment targets. It's basically all the app service in Azure, right? So you're gonna add deployment target and select Azure Web App, which is an app service. And here you input, you have to specify what environment this is gonna be for. And you can create a target role. And this target role is shared between different can be shared between different deployment targets or environments. And you specify the subscription account and the Azure Web App. And I'll go a little bit more into detail in Octopus after the slides. After you set that up, you're gonna set up your life cycles. And what are life cycles? So they give control over the way releases of the software are promoted between environments. It's a deployment workflow that has control order of promotion, automate deployment to specific environments, and you can specify the retention policies. Life cycles are defined by phases and can have one or many phases. So they occur in order, can be defined as to be automatic or manual, and can have a set of number of environments that must be released before the next one. So you can set up the rules for those. So to create a life cycle is pretty easy. You go to, yep. Someone has a question? All right. So you'll go under library life cycles and add a life cycle, and you'll enter the name, the retention policy, and the phases it's gonna follow, right? So in our case, we have the retention policy set to only keep a limited number of builds of releases, so 5 and 5, right? And we have our pre-production phase, which includes 3 different environments: dev, test, staging. Again, the environments, it's up to you. They're customizable how many you want. And the requirement to promote to the next phase will be that all must be completed. So now let's go into creating Octopus projects. The projects let you manage the deployment process and the releases. You can define the steps, the variables, and the environments where the software will be deployed, and the release of your software. Variables can be scope for environments, and this lets you replace configuration for each image or application depending on the environment. In a project, you can switch which images are going to be deployed to the individual environments. So first you create a project group. So in our case, we already have an existing one, will be the Tarrant County project group. And within that group, you can add different projects. So it's pretty easy. You specify the project name, the project group, and specify the life cycle that we set up before. And within a project, there's a deployment process, which are the steps that Octopus Server orchestrates to deploy your software. Each step contains a specific action or set of actions that will be executed at a time. What's nice about it is that Octopus, as you can see in the picture here, offers already pre-installed steps that are pretty common. So for Azure, we have these ones, but there's many more for Kubernetes, AWS, etc. So to add the deployment process within the project, you'll go to processes, add the step, and we want to select the deploy Azure App Service step. As you can see, the ones that are by Octopus are specified here, but you can install community ones as well. So within the process, you'll select which is going to be on behalf of what selected target role. So if we go back here, when we were setting up our deployment target, we created our target role. So that's the one you're going to be specifying on behalf of. Then in the deployment section, you will select the package fit and the package ID that it's going to be. So the image is going to be deploying to the package, right? So back to TeamCity, in that last step for the push API on the step number 5, right? For push API, this is where we push that NuGet package into that Octopus feed that's used in here. And then in the configuration, to replace configuration, you can substitute your files. So web config or app settings JSON. In our case, we use app settings JSON. And the variables are set up within the project. And here you can specify based on naming convention. The variables are going to be replaced on that app settings file. So after you have all configured, finally you will go back to TeamCity, hit run, sit back and look the build go and see if what you configure has been successfully. So now I'm gonna go back to Octopus. So here in projects, we have the project group. Select the project. Here you have your variables that you can specify.
Si no lo llego a acabar, sí, sí me voy a tardar un poco.
All right. All right. So here you can specify the processes. Here we have one, a deployment process. As you can see, we have the target role. You can specify the package ID, the feed this is from. So here you can change this to the built-in feed, select the package. Specify the file that's gonna be, the variables are gonna replace. And as you can see, we have our environment. And if I go back to TeamCity, so the project name is Terran API. It's a project name. The environment will be Terran integration, and this is parameter is set to be dev here. So that will be Terran integration dev and the release number. So this is the release version number that's going to be in here. So if I go back here, this one, hit run. I can see in here in the build log all the steps for TeamCity go through. And while this goes, does anybody have any questions? All right.
I don't.
You can see trigger the build here. And it's been successful. So we have our pipeline from TeamCity to Octopus and to Azure. right here. All right. So that's it for the complete pipeline. Anybody has any questions? If not, this is the presentation. And thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you, Ricardo.
Very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you, Ricardo.
Thanks,
Okay,
Carlo.
guys.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Good day.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ricardo.